Hello everybody, it's I, Flamingo Writer here, back again for another video. And what better way to talk about a video by discussing about a network that I rarely, if ever, talk about on my channel. Nickelodeon. Look, I'm not gonna be around the bush when I say this, but it needs to be said. When I was a kid, Nickelodeon was sort of my jam, but if you have been with me for a while, the only time I did get to watch this here network was when I was only a little kid. As such, I didn't really have that much options because I had very limited TV, and thus I didn't grow up with it entirely as time went on. But as you can probably guess by now, I'm not one of those people who want to talk about Nickelodeon necessarily, mostly due to a few things. Not just because I didn't have that much growing up with it, but because, well, practically everybody on the internet has talked about Nickelodeon, so what else is there for me to say? At this point, Nickelodeon has had a fair share of people who talked about its history, about what got it so great, about the nostalgia, while others just talk about its downfall. And let's be real here. The real reason why we all know about Nickelodeon's downfall is because SpongeBob is the main source of this network. But I'm not talking about either of the shows that those have. Especially because Nickelodeon has way too many shows as it is to talk about, and considering I can't show clips because Viacom is such overprotective assholes, I can't really show clips here and there anyways, and because of that. But I'm talking about a show that I personally still love today more than I realized. In fact, I go so far as to say that this may be a show that you probably wouldn't be expecting myself to talk about on my channel, but let's talk about it anyways. As such, As Told by Ginger. Now I know what you're thinking, and you're probably thinking to yourself, really? This is your favorite Nickelodeon show with the weird classy Chubo-esque art style and such? Compared to a lot of other shows, you must be high on drugs, Flamingo. What are you, taking a 420? Well, no, but considering that I still love As Told by Ginger even to this day, we're gonna go into why I love this show so much and why it stuck with me on a personal level. So as such, let's see if the grass is any greener as we dive into As Told by Ginger. As Told by Ginger was the creation behind the one person named Emily Kapnick, who would go on to create other such teen drama, but this is literally the only thing I've seen of hers, and from what I can tell, it was more from her personal experience. See, she created the idea for somewhat inspired by her home life when she was growing up, and decided to write a series on that. However, before the Nickelodeon network decided to pick it up for its entire show, it started out with the pilot episode premiering in 1998. With a pilot introduced called The Party, and from there, the intro to the series became a smash hit. Well, for those who watched it. Yeah, I wasn't born in 1998, I was born a year later, but after the party became a thing, As Told by Ginger became a full show, and 2 years later, it became the show that is. With the show becoming what it is as a cult classic, and from there on, it became a really hit show for the audiences alike. But alas, only 60 episodes in a total of 3 seasons, this show became beloved to those who have still love it today, or just tuning in by seeing that this show may have came out way ahead of its time. And when I say ahead of its time, I mean that this show, if it came out today, maybe it would have stood a chance, but knowing Nickelodeon so far, I highly doubt it would surpass after 1 season, so I think they may have made the somewhat right call, if anything to judge by. Chances are that's probably what it is with Nickelodeon these days, but albeit that's really what they are in an eggshell right there. But before we get into that, let's talk about the show itself. Basically, what you need to know is that the show itself focuses around our main character, Ginger Fowley, an aspiring writer who writes in her diary in a lot of episodes, as well as writing some poems. Oh, I see we have a writer on our hands. Unfortunately, at Licky Junior High, he doesn't seem to have a lot of things going for her aside from her writing, but she does have her friends, Dodie Bishop and Macy Lightfoot, who both join her as they have their misadventures in school. alongside with her own family, her divorced mother Lois Fowley, and her younger brother Carl, who both do stuff along with her to do whatever they can to help the family out. And as you can probably guess, though, yes, Lois does work as a nurse, as an overtimer, but she still puts her kids over her over her own job because she still views them as her own top priority. So for a show like this, it does seem like As Told by Ginger is one of those shows. Just slice of life and nothing going for it, but I didn't tell you guys about whereabouts this aired besides Nickel on Teen Nick of all places. Now, I realize that this is a block where this has teens, sitcoms, and teen drama shows, but that's pretty rare, especially when it comes to animated shows on the other hand. So what I told you is basically the rundown about what happens in As Told by Ginger. Except not entirely, and here's what I mean when I'm about to say. You know how most Nickelodeon shows usually go to the 11-minute episode rank unless they do a 22-minute episode just so they can fill in the blanks about what's going on in each special that they could? Well, Nickelodeon didn't really do that with As. Well, Nickelodeon has one of those shows that made As Told by Ginger fill in 22 minutes. Plus, they have multi-parters here and there that run down the TV movies. Now, I realize there are some Nickelodeon shows out there that fill in 22 minutes. The only things I can come up with at the moment are The Wild Thornberrys and Rocket Power. Still, though. But I really feel like As Told by Ginger really hit the market for teens. Except, I wouldn't recommend the show to everybody if you're not into one thing. Teen drama. And I can kind of see why some people would not like that in that regard. As much as I admit that I am into somewhat of teen drama, it doesn't help that a lot of the time, like a lot of teen dramas, there's going to be a lot of petty arguments with teenagers. And while I admit that may not be everyone's thing, I think this year may be a little more tolerable than it usually is because teen dramas, despite having petty teenagers, As Told by Ginger plays the more, not safe route like a lot of other shows would do, but I think more on say they really know how to tackle a lot of topics. And by that I mean this show is not afraid to follow continuity when it has the chance. And by that, yeah, continuity was pretty rare, especially when it comes to the Nickelodeon show. See, As Told by Ginger is one of those shows where you think that they would just stay the same age, or sometimes they would grow over time just to say they only throw that in there. But no, As Told by Ginger really does grow over time, and when you watch the show for yourself, you do see continuity otherwise from here and there. One episode I remember watching this here when I was a kid, well, honestly, I didn't know what it was at the time because I was doing some kind of party with my older sister at the time. I decided to have a little chance to watch the show before the party began. In the episode Family Therapy. Now, admittedly, I didn't know what I was getting into at the time because, well, I was a dumb kid who was just going in blind. But even with that said, however, I do recall watching this episode where both Ginger and Dodie try their best to throw a party for Macy because her parents forgot about it. Yeah, like I said, this show is not afraid to not go to the not safe route, and it really does show, mostly because Macy's parents are her therapists, and since they're always busy, they decide to throw a party for her anyways, but more on and say they really throw her a party that's more for little kids, gathering a slide, putting on some kid-like PJs, and I get that they weren't home that often, but geez, that's gonna be really depressing, even for a teenager standpoint. Whereas Mipsy herself gets a teenager party, which, yeah, I think I'll get to the characters in a minute. But as time goes on, I didn't know what this show was because, well, I was around, I don't know how old I was. I think I was around, like, say, 6, possibly 7. I was pretty little when I first show aired on Nickelodeon, or at least they had them airing for a few reruns before they forgot about it. But hey, that's no stranger to Nickelodeon these days, am I right? But as it still stands, I still believe that you can watch As Told by Ginger if you ever want to get the chance, and still do it in spite of all that. I mean, seriously, come on now. If you can get into something like Hey Arnold or Doug or whatever old Nickelodeon show you can get your paws on, I think As Told by Ginger won't hurt you that bit. So check it out whenever you have the chance, but we're only just getting started. So I might as well talk about the characters because otherwise I really have to explore about them. So buckle up. I'm not going to go over every character of the show because despite it having 3 seasons and 60 episodes, this show managed to have a ton of characters, but I'll go over the important ones first. I already mentioned Ginger earlier, but she bears repeating. But one thing you need to know is that aside from being an aspiring writer, she can have her difficulties having her writing shine at times. Like in one episode, she actually wanted to do something with a writing poem in the episode, and she was gone. And I have to say, it was pretty much what you expected. Her writing got the best out of people just to think that she really has depression or something. And I'm surprised Nickelodeon got away with something like that because I didn't know what the hell that was when I first viewed this show when I was around 17 or 18. Yeah, I did watch one episode as a kid, but I didn't go back to this until I was a high schooler. Pretty funny considering there's teenagers, but you do you, I guess. But aside from that, Ginger does have her moments where she will put her foot down if things don't really go her own way, but that's only on occasion, unlike a certain other character, Dodie. And, oh boy, Dodie is such a wild card, so I'm gonna save her when we get to the negatives, because, oh boy, is she a real package to unpack. Trust me, if you've heard about this show, you probably know about Ginger's history with Dodie, but let's pretend we don't know and move on to the next character. Macy. And I have to say, out of all the 3 girls, Macy was always the one that's always been the kindest. Not to say that Ginger's not kind, of course she is, but I think Macy may be more of the socially awkward kind of person, but she does stand out by showing off her own abilities, when to show that she can show her own skill at times. But I really can't say that much about her considering that she's really shy, awkward, and still pretty fun in her own way, but nonetheless still likable enough to be around. Hell, she's like a sister-like character when it comes to Ginger, always making sure that she gets on top and stuff like that. More than I can say about Dodie. No, I'm not over that yet. Next up is Darren. Despite being friends with the girls, he actually does seem like a pretty supportive guy when you get right down to it. He starts becoming Ginger's boyfriend later on, but later he starts breaking up with her just so he can be with, well, another character named Simone, but that doesn't come until season 3 of the show, so if you ever wonder if that was a dickish move, which I don't blame you if you do find that dickish, but still. I think what really makes me enjoy Darren's character is that he really does seem supportive around not just Ginger, but around the other girls as well. Goes to show you the guy himself really does care about his friends more than you may think. And following that, we have Courtney Gripling. And I'm just going to come out and say it. I just need to bring this out while I still can. You know how most teen drama shows, especially ones that are animated, always have the petty, bitchy alpha girl in order to be the one bringing down our heroine or something when it comes to being around them? Yeah, Ginger's friend Courtney's not like that. While Courtney herself can be a bit of a ditz, no surprise there, she actually comes off a bit like, say, Brittany Taylor from Daria. And yes, before you ask, I want to get to Daria sometime, but one step at a time. As you can probably guess right now, Courtney is one of those characters where even if she can be a bit of a ditz, she does show she does care a lot about Ginger in a lot of ways. And despite being a popular girl, even if she does have her moments where she wants to show herself as pretty unpopular, she really does seem to care about Ginger more than you may think. More than I can say about what she says about Dodie's character, but hey, it's a fair wage if you think. Compared to her, we got Miranda, and unlike Courtney, where she cares about Ginger, Miranda is possibly the opposite of that. Not to say that she hates her entirely, she does put her foot down just to tell Ginger something that she's supposed to know, but my god, a lot of people seem to hate Miranda all because of how much she teases and makes fun of Ginger, but you know what, I'm just gonna come out and say it. I don't care how much backlash I get, but I think I need to say this while I still can. I think Miranda does have her standpoints. While you could argue she has her moments where she doesn't really like Ginger, she does seem to care about her in some ways, even if she doesn't show it all the time. And for what it's worth, at least she has a lot more common sense than Courtney does when it comes to something like that. But then again, I think that's what happens when you have a right-hand man, straight man, straight woman. I don't know what's the female term for straight man, so you can tell me if you want to. But we also have Mipsy, and unlike Miranda, where she does taunt to Ginger in something that you can say is teasing, Mipsy is somewhat of that, but not entirely. But she does seem like she does come into him when it comes to that. Now, when I first saw this year's show, I thought at first that she was a one-off character, but no, Mipsy does appear on occasion. She just doesn't appear in every episode or something. Otherwise, the show would probably overstay its welcome from time to time. But Mipsy does prove herself to be pretty nice at times, especially when it comes to characters like Dodie, for example. Yeah, I'm not so sure of how much I should really spiel about Dodie, but I really feel like I need to just drive that home when I still have the chance. So wait till we get that. But then we got the characters Carl, and soon you'll see Hoodsie in a bit. But I think they might be the characters I remember most about this show when I first saw it when I was a kid, when I was watching that said episode. But I don't really want to say those are the only two I can only mention. Yeah, whenever you watch the show for yourself, Carl usually has a B plot and on occasion an A plot whenever something happens. And while he and Ginger have those sibling rivalries, I think theirs is a lot more dynamic than you may think. Despite having their moments, they still manage to care for each other. Hell, at one point, when Ginger went into the hospital when she had appendicitis. Yikes. Ginger's younger brother Carl went to go to the hospital to see if his sister was alright and was really worried despite being an atheist at times. You know, for a show like this, even you could say their sibling rivalry is nothing new for any shows, you can definitely say that Carl does care for his big sister more than you may realize. And it doesn't help that he has gross habits. You know the kind. Boys doing some gross things or anything like that. I don't want to sound sexist if anyone thinks about that, but let me just say I don't know what's it like to have any brothers. I've only had nephews and brother-in-laws, so yeah, and there's also some cousins that are male as well, but like I said, I can't really judge what boys did as a kid. I grew up with sisters, so I don't know what that they all do, so take your pick. But yeah, let's talk about Hoodsie for a sec. For all intents and purposes, despite being Dodie's younger brother, he actually does show he really does care about those around him, even if he doesn't want to get himself into trouble with Carl. But he does care about his best friend and usually hangs around with him because, well, what other choice could there be? And I won't lie, it does feel like they really have a lot of things going for him as well. Hell, in one episode called Losing Nana Bishop, we actually get a little more insight into seeing that maybe there are more things about to these here characters than one may think. But I have to be honest, they really did a lot with him in that episode since he had to write a eulogy and talk about Nana Bishop despite not having too much connection with her. That's pretty rare for a show those days, but nowadays you can pretty much bet that's definitely not something new. I wouldn't say Ginger was the first time doing that kind of episode, but when it comes to Hoodsie and the way he gave that speech, my heart really touched when he gave it. I don't know how many relatives people have lost when they lost their grandparents, because I've only lost my dad, and I really have to say, they really did him pretty well. It really shows how much character development they have in the show. We also have Blake on our hand, and yeah, this is Courtney's younger brother, and I think he may be one of those characters who's trying to be all fancy because he's rich and all that. Ugh, never do that voice again, ever. Anyways, yeah, here doesn't really interact with Carl's friend Blake, even though, well, Carl doesn't admit that Blake is his friend, he still joins in regardless of that, even sometimes getting things back. Like in one episode where he tries to retrieve his blanket back, all because it was really inherited to someone to give to Blake. And I have to say, even if the show is not entirely funny, it's kind of hilarious how Blake knows that something's going on, and I really do admire. But we also got Brandon, and yeah, like Blake, Carl and Hoodsie don't really allow him into their friend group, but even with that said, I kind of do like Brandon, even if Grey Delisle is still doing her usual little voice to make it sound all, well, you could say it's annoying, though. I don't really think it's that annoying to get grading afterwards. And Brandon also has a pet monkey named Mr. Licorice. Yeah, just go with it. And I feel pretty bad for both Brandon and Blake, because if they really did join the group, they would probably have a fun time. But I guess Carl is better off with Hoodsy. Don't want to think about implications, because a lot of fanfic readers are probably thinking too much of that, but still. And finally, one of the last good characters we can add on here, as long as I don't feel like I'm missing anyone out, because like I said, there are a ton of characters, but I want to talk about Lois Foutley herself. Unlike a certain other Lois from either Family Guy or, say, Malcolm in the Middle, I think this Lois is probably my favorite out of the bunch. From what I can tell, she's really very motherly, but aside from taking care of her kids because she really wants to do what she can to support them, considering she's a divorced mother, and everything, she also makes sure her kids come first and never talks down to her kids. Sure, she does have her moments when she does put some sense into them, not just Carl, but sometimes Ginger as well, like, say, in one episode where she attempts to put makeup on from her room when she wasn't supposed to. Even with that said, she is very caring and very loving, and even giving good advice for not just for Ginger and Carl as well, but as well as the audience. It's really no wonder why people call her a best mother out there, right up there with Helen and Morgendorfer as one of the few underrated mothers you can definitely bet. You know, if I ever do a Mother's Day list, I wonder if I could do something like that to talk about best mothers. It's pretty rare when you say that, but I really say that's because, well, Lois, like I said, is divorced, and I think this may be one of the rare times we ever see a mother get divorced, because the only time I've ever seen something like that would have to be from another show called Braceface. Another animated show that was made for teen drama fans out there, but nonetheless, I still enjoy it in spite of the flaws it has, even though I've only seen a handful of episodes. But I'm not so sure if I want to talk about that show. It is a show that is one of the shows I want to talk about, Canadian shows I want to talk about that are my favorites, but one step at a time as well. So after all of those, I think it's only fitting if I talk about something that I need to discuss right here and now before we get into the negative aspects of the show. I might as well talk about its animation. I might as well talk about the animation, and it's... I don't know if it's just me, but maybe it's just because I can tolerate this kind of show when it comes to the animation style, and considering I've seen a bit of classic Chubo shows where they had the same designs, the weird lips and the weird placement, like in their chins and the weird long necks and some of the body proportions. Now, to be fair, I'm not really faulting the creator for that. From what I can tell, it's actually something that classic Chubo was known for, but I think I'm kind of glad they slightly changed it more than I say about the pilot. Seriously, if you don't believe me, just look how they made Miranda. Seriously, when you look at something like this, it kind of looks like she has a giraffe neck, and I'm glad they changed the style a bit. Even looking at their eyes, they look slightly tinier than their usual predecessor. I'm not saying this is the worst they've done, but I'm glad that they changed the animation style just to feel more, well, not best or anything, but comfortable enough to actually get accustomed to. Seriously, it's bad enough when my art style is not even the greatest, and this is the worst they've done yet. Seriously, don't ask me to draw people. Okay, I think I've rambled enough about the good things. Now let's ramble on to the bad stuff, and I think we might as well get one of the bad things out of the way. In this case, one of its characters is Dodie Bishop. For all intents and purposes, I could not tell you how much I despise this character. And if you're a Ginger fan like I am, you already know what she is. But for those who don't know, Ginger has this friend named Dodie. And like Ginger, she appears in every episode. Oh my god. But I don't even know where to begin with this character. For starters, I think it's safe to say she's a fucking hypocrite. And I say this in no exaggeration whatsoever, because every time whenever Ginger does something to make her writing seem like she's getting on top of something, and what's more, she doesn't brag about it, Dodie goes out of her way just to feel like she's on the bottom ground. Like she really needs to be more popular than what it is. Oh, and speaking of popularity, I'm surprised nobody said this before now, or maybe they did. I just forgot about it. But why isn't Courtney with Ginger and Macy instead of having Dodie with them instead? The reason I'm saying this is because Dodie is one of those characters who acts like the alpha bitch that never became one that was popular. And by speaking of popularity, I think it's only fitting if I say that she really fits the description of that kind of character. If you don't believe me, most of the time when her episodes come into play, she just wants to show that she's more popular by saying that she wants to become that instead of being there for her friends. Yeah, because it's not like your friends have been there for you every day of the week, bitch. And it's pretty clear to me that the show itself tries to paint a picture as we were supposed to sympathize with her, but I'm just gonna be real with you guys. I could not, for the life of me, stand this character, even if they tried to. My first intro to the show when I was watching it as a high school student, when I was around 17 or 18, was the episode of Lice and Friends. And in there, I didn't understand what the comments were saying when it was up on YouTube. Yeah, like a lot of Viacom properties, good luck finding about what people have to say about it. Which, yeah, the comments themselves talk about how Dodie is the worst character, which, personally, I didn't understand it at first. I glanced what they were talking about until I started watching a little further ahead. And good news for after binging it, now I can see why. What I can tell you about Ginger is that while I do admire her, I really feel like I need to say that she has more tolerance than I do if she can put up with Dodie's behavior. I shit you not. Most of the time, whenever her Dodie does get her eccentric episodes, a lot of them just feel like the same thing. Like Dodie wants to become popular, or Dodie wants to sabotage or something. Speaking of sabotage, there's this one episode called Wicked. Though, if you want a more in-depth look about this episode and inspect, I give you to look at No Park and Barry, because he actually goes in more depth of it than I do, and plus he has a lot of hatred for Dodie as well, so I'll just leave that in the description. But what you need to know about this episode is, in my perspective, it's possibly one of the worst episodes to come out of this show. And this was written by the creator herself, who's written such episodes like Butterflies Are Free or something like And She Was Gone. Oh my god. And I realize that not every writer's gonna have every sky high unless you're someone like Paul Dini, but I just want you all to bear with me for just a sec. For context, Wicked Game is basically about Ginger coming back from a place where he went where to do her own writing and get somewhere out there. Unfortunately, beforehand, Dodie was still a prick in there, but in this episode, she's even worse. What you need to know is that he goes ahead and tries to sabotage both the Ginger and Darren's relationship, all because she can't stand those two being together and having Macy, yes, frickin' Macy, to come with her so they can sabotage it. I mean, really? This is how you want to do it? You really want to sabotage? Oh, but it gets worse, people. Apparently Miranda and Mipsy are into this plan, so they decide to go with that. And I'd be intermiss if I didn't say this, but can I just say for the record, this show is not afraid to go through character derailment at times. If you're not familiar with the term character derailment, it's basically the opposite of character development. Where character development, you make the characters grow and still make them learn from their time on as time goes on with the series, as long as it goes. You might as well just say that character development is the opposite of that. Well, they'll think they'll learn something, but apparently not. And Dodie is the definition of character derailment. I shit you not. I double shit you not. I triple shit you not. Because most of the time in this episode, she just goes so far as to do whatever she can to sabotage it, and we're supposed to find this all okay at the end. It doesn't make it any difference, because for a brief second, Darren didn't believe Ginger at first, but after Courtney, the fucking heroine of this episode, decides to step in, this is where she puts her plan into action. Yeah, just because Courtney is pretty ditzy doesn't mean she doesn't have her intelligence every now and then, guys. And as you can probably guess, yeah, this is what ultimately breaks the friend group apart, temporarily, because you think that's bad. Well, I did say this show followed continuity, But unfortunately, the next episode seemed like it felt like they were losing an episode streak. Let me just say this. He's told what happened and basically says that she's a big girl. That's it. Dodie's a big girl now and she could take care of her own things. But this is Dodie. She's just one of those characters who doesn't know how to grow up. In the episode Easter Ham, after that happened, we're assumed to believe that their friendship has already came together again, which, yeah, I don't know how that is supposed to be. Now, you could argue maybe I skipped an episode, or maybe there was just a lost episode someplace, but the latter of which I'm kind of wondering if I did feel like I skipped it, but on the other hand, I'm just here saying that I probably don't know how else to say it. This here show followed continuity, if you remember from saying that millions of years ago. But if you really want to get into this show, I hate to say this, but this episode just abruptly opens up with them being friends again. What the fuck happened? Are we supposed to assume that Ginger and Dodie had made up for each other? You know, as much as some people have said it before, you shouldn't really forgive your friends if they're gonna sabotage it. But as much as I have to say it though, this is where Joanne, yes, Dodie's mother, Joanne, or Joanna, you know what, I'm not gonna prosper into saying which one's the right name because they're both practically the same name. Anyways, Mrs. Bishop seems to have had a heart attack. Yes, somehow she has a heart attack even though she faked it. I wonder if Dodie got that from her. If so, I really don't want to fucking know. Yes, even with that said, this is where Dodie and Ginger are forbidden to see each other because if there's one thing you want to do is fake a heart attack so you can get the ham and then surprisingly enough forbid your friends to go to that. And since Dodie knows that Ginger's in a relationship with Darren, that's really all enough to say that she can't really celebrate Darren's birthday party all because of this whole argument going on. So after all that, even if Darren does put his foot down, rightfully so, I feel like that's still not enough for the episode. Yes, Courtney does too by saying that Dodie's a big girl now, but I'm sure that she's just as a big girl as DW who can't give away her Mary Moo Cow stuff. That's really just sad. It doesn't help that most of the time, and I do want to say this again, most of the time you just want Ginger and Dodie to be friends again, which I'm sure the audience is pretty much losing their patience right about now. Yeah, I know this came out in season 2, and this show has about 3 seasons, but fuck it, I'd probably be done after all the shit that Dodie's been doing for the past several episodes, and even then, we're supposed to think that they're both best friends. And you know, part of me doesn't want to bring up this show again right away because I want to do a video on it as well, but this kind of reminds me of what happened to Daria and Jane, what happened in Is It. Look, say what you want about that season being intense. Season 4 was pretty hard to watch at times of Daria, even if, yeah, like as told by Ginger, I jumped into it too soon afterwards. But even with that said, however, say what you want about the dynamic between Daria and Jane after Daria stole Tom away from her, but I feel like in that defense, I can at least somewhat defend it, because at least in the movie Is It Falling Out, we got more closure of what happened between these two girls and what made them made up. Now, I personally feel like I'm one of the most controversial flamingos out there, so let me just say for the record, I can at least buy that they had a little more resolution to it. What's there to say about Dodie and Ginger's friendship in Nestle by Ginger? The most I can understand why the writers were just so quick into forgiving is because, well, you have to forgive your friends, guys, because if you don't, there's gonna be the status quo broken. Why are we still doing this? And I know some people are going to say to me by the end of the day, there are going to be times where some shows don't want to break the status quo, but think about this. As for My Ginger is one of those shows that wasn't afraid to go through continuity and sometimes break the status quo when they wanted to, but I'm guessing it's because without Dodie, there is no show. I mean, some people can make the argument that maybe Dodie can be funny at times, and there are moments where, like the aforementioned losing Nana Bishop episode, this was one time where I did feel sorry for Dodie. It doesn't say a lot, but at least it had something. Apparently, a lot of people took issue with Dodie's character, and after watching through this your show for the first time after years to come, I can definitely assure you I can see why so many people were up in arms about Dodie's actions. Because if that's anything to judge by, then you may want to consider it regardless. And yet, after all of that, aside from the Dodie incident and all that other stuff, you might think that this show may have been perfect after all of that, even after the flaws, right? No. See, you might be wondering to yourself, why doesn't Ginger feel like it's more popular than it was back then, rather than it is today? I think it has to do with the network in of itself. Again, like No Parking Barry, I think old school Lane herself, Patricia, really had made this a lot easier to say what she had thought about the show entirely, and as well as other stuff. If you want a more in-depth look about As Told by Ginger's video making in there, just go watch Patricia, but I'm just going to give you the brief summary of what I think about why Nickelodeon didn't promote the show as good. Now, I can't really say for sure, but if I had to guess, Nickelodeon was trying to promote this show in the best way they could, but unfortunately, not a lot of people sticked around just to watch this year's show. And when it comes on, this year's show may have been one of the more, not forgotten, but more overlooked shows, if anything. And I feel pity for As Told by Ginger, because if it's anything to judge by, it would have been and benefited to a lot of more stuff though. Now granted, the only way you could probably watch this show, if you're not like me who went through piracy websites back then, you can find this show on Paramount Plus if you can find it how long it's going to be there, considering that Paramount Plus, along with other streaming brands, seem to have this notion where they'll do anything to take it down, but I don't want that to happen. Even if you could argue that the show can be popular there, I think it may be because of its own popularity on the web. Again, aside from No Parking Barry and some like Old School Lane who give retrospectives of their own reviews of the show from time to time, this year's show, As Told by Ginger, is one of those cases where it was because the internet never forgot about. But speaking of which, you all might be wondering something that I haven't answered yet. Why is this my favorite Nickelodeon show of all time? After all, it ain't no Avatar The Last Airbender or, say, Hey Arnold. Why is it that I love As Told by Ginger so much? Well, I think it has to do with its own time period, if anything to judge by that I haven't really gotten to the show. But nowadays, I think I may appreciate it a lot more than I did back then. Again, this is about an aspiring writer who mostly writes stuff in her diary or sometimes in her poetry because she really wants to get her words out there and express herself. And when it comes right down to it, that stuck with me on a personal level. I'm sure that even the most diehard writers out there would find this show fascinating for what it's worth. Now, the show is not all the time about to say writing and everything, but not something like, say, a Chalk Zone where you can definitely say there's more drawing than that, even if I only seen a few episodes of that show, more than I could say about one episode of As Told by Ginger. But even with that said, I think As Told by Ginger may have came out about some time where us, the audience, may not appreciate it back then, but we still will enjoy it for what it's worth now. I mean, I'm one of those people who will go back to the show, even if, yes, you could argue that some episodes are pretty bad, Dodie Bishop's notwithstanding all the time, but I feel like even with that said, it still managed to really impact me. Again, you're talking to someone who's a writer. I wrote in mostly journals and notebooks back then before I got into doing something on my laptop or, say, on my phone because that's where I usually do my writings and such. But even with that said, you're watching this video on someone who wants to be a writer herself, and hey, just like As Told by Ginger, I started writing since as long as I could remember. And that's not something you see in most writers these days where they talk about to their own perspective. I mean, unless you're someone like... No, I'm not referring to Doug Walker, people. I'm talking about Nickelodeon's Doug, which was, well, not overlooked like As Told by Ginger. It still got not the fans it does, even if a lot of people more likely think it's more of a Disney show. Seriously, again, As like I saw why Ginger Old School Lane did a better job at talking about this show. And I think it's only fitting if I say that it does have the same aspect. A bunch of teenagers doing no slice of life things while it's having a writer and all that such. I think it's only fitting if I say that these here shows were made for me in mind. Though, admittedly, I didn't really see a lot of Doug. I've only seen a lot more SOY Ginger, and I'm fine with that, if anything to judge by. Though, if I ever do want to talk about Doug, that's not gonna happen for some time now, as much as I hate to say. But for what it's worth, I still love SOY Ginger. Would I call it the best show out there, aside from some of the shows I've talked about before now? No, there are some flaws here and there. Some of the characters could be better written, and the character development, aside from Dodie, could be a lot more than what it is. I really feel like SOY Ginger really came out at the wrong time, but at the same time, if it came out today, I don't think Nickelodeon would have treated it that well either, anyways. But the sad thing is, that's what I think of SOY Ginger is in a lot of ways. It can come out to before its time and after its time, but I think it made the right call that more than ever before. You see plenty of other people talk about this show, about what made Dodie so irresistible and what made the show go over itself and so much other stuff. Now, with that said, I don't think everyone wants to watch all those videos at once, which I don't want you to for the sake of it, but you can watch it for yourself to see for it is. Aside from Paramount Plus, they do have it on websites like, say, Watch Cartoon, which is where I started watching this show, but you're gonna get more on, say, the old Teen Nick stuff, and I don't think that's gonna hurt anybody unless you're someone like me, who grew up mostly in the 2000s era, or someone who's been like that for a while. It's just enough to actually get you in the right hook for it, but I can understand if you're someone who's not into teen drama, which, again, it's not as petty as those other teen dramas like Degrassi or something along those lines, but it's tolerable enough to actually give a recommendation if you want to see something like this, if you are a aspiring writer, or just for someone who's into something like that. You know, the more I go back to this show, I kind of have to say I kind of miss going to school at times. Hey, don't look at me like that. You know damn well being an adult is not easy. I guess what I'm trying to say is that for a 25-year-old show, I say the show holds up pretty well, especially some of its messages. Even if they are sometimes adult, that doesn't mean that you can't really watch the show for yourself. I would go over the movie The Wedding, but honestly, I'd probably be repeating the same thing over and over again. But it's meant to be the clear finale, unlike the TV show we got, which I think makes up for some of the weaker episodes in season 3. I wouldn't say season 3 was bad necessarily, just weaker compared to some of the other episodes that they had, though admittedly this show does have some of that going in for it. But with that said, if you ever do end up watching this show, don't be afraid to check it out. They're on Paramount Plus and some piracy websites, but I'd rather recommend just going through Paramount Plus if you have that app. If not, then you have to watch it on Watch Cartoon. Just watch out for any ads, if anything. I don't think I need to say anything about SOY Ginger more than what it is, because this video has been running on long enough already. But with that, I really do thank you all so much for watching, and happy 25th anniversary for SOY Ginger. Now, with that said, I think on Monday we're gonna look at another Dark Magical Girl show. Yeah, I know what you're thinking, but don't worry, this one happens to be one I have more than what I could say about it. It's not the worst thing, but it's definitely far from being the greatest thing. And no, it's not a Madoka Magic ripoff. Though you'll hear me why I say that when I get to that video. But until then, I thank you all so much for watching. See you all next time. And as always, stay flamingo-tastic. See